And, I'm an optimist. When I say that, Alzheimer's starts in the brain 20 to 30 years before the first symptom, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that in a good way because we have decades to do the things that we know can slow down or stop the process. We don't really know if we can prevent Alzheimer's altogether, but we know that we can slow it down tremendously. And that's a really important point. So the thing to know about nutrition is that there are things that are protective of the brain, and then there are things that are inflammatory to the brain. There are inflammatory particles in the foods that we eat. So part of it is eating a brain healthy diet, but part of it is also avoiding certain foods that we know are just not good for our brain and can accelerate decline.
Welcome to the Wise Consumer Podcast, the answer to your eco-friendly and healthy lifestyle questions. How to reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals, whether or not it's normal to have a painful period, how to live an eco-friendly lifestyle on a budget, and more. With the help of experts, I'm talking scientists, toxicologists, endocrinologists, cosmetic chemists, you'll get knowledge and know-how to your most pressing health concerns and sustainability questions straight from the source. I'm Madeline Weisskopf, your host, confidant, and in-house science nerd, here on a mission to help empower, inspire, and support you in your own health and eco journey. Because, friend, I am a firm believer that if you don't feel good, you can't do good. So, pour yourself a cup of tea, kick off your shoes, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Here's a question for you. How often do you stop to think about your brain? I mean, really stop to think about it. I know over the years, I've unfortunately taken my brain for granted. Rarely do I ever really think about how amazing this 3-pound organ actually is and how much I depend on it on a daily basis. Your brain controls everything: your thoughts, memories, emotions, touch, motor skills, vision, breathing, temperature, hunger. Basically, every process that regulates your body and helps to keep you alive. See what I mean? When you actually stop to think about it, you can't help but realize just how awesome in every sense of the word our brains are. Now, I know on the podcast we often chat about how nutrition can support hormone health and our overall health, but today I want to shift gears a bit and explore how what we eat can also affect and improve our brain health. If you're curious about how best to nourish, fuel, and support your brain and want to better understand why it really matters, then you're absolutely going to love this conversation with Dr. Annie Fenn, the founder of the Brain Health Kitchen, an evidence-based online resource created to help individuals learn how and what to eat to delay and resist cognitive decline. Dr. Annie Fenn's career trajectory is an interesting one. Prior to launching the Brain Health Kitchen in 2015, Annie spent 20 years as a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist who specialized in menopausal health. She also delivered more than 1,000 babies, which I think is truly remarkable. Yet, as you'll hear, Annie is also a passionate cook and a firm believer that helping people change what they eat and how they live can be just as effective a health-giving intervention as prescribing pills or procedures. So Annie decided to, quote, retire and to trade in her stethoscope for an apron and went back to school to study culinary arts in Mexico, Italy, and at the Culinary Institute of America. In 2017, she founded the Brain Health Kitchen Cooking School, the only school of its kind that focuses specifically on fending off Alzheimer's and other dementias by teaching students about which foods are most neuroprotective, which ones accelerate cognitive decline, and how to prepare foods using brain-friendly cooking techniques. In this conversation, Annie and I are exploring why brain health matters, the importance and benefits of sleep and exercise for your brain, how what we eat can help protect and delay our brains from developing Alzheimer's, which foods are most neuroprotective and why, the pros and cons of drinking alcohol, brain-friendly cooking techniques, and why it's never too early to start making lifestyle and nutrition changes to support our brains. It was such an honor and a pleasure chatting with Annie. I learned so much about brain health and nutrition. And you guys, I'm really eager for you to tune in, as I know this is a conversation that not only are you going to enjoy, but one that you and your brain will absolutely benefit from. So without further ado, here is Annie. Annie, thank you so very much for being on the Wise Consumer Podcast and making the time to chat with all of us today. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Madeline. This is really a pleasure.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm going to start off with like the basic question that I ask all my guests. For anyone who's not familiar with you or your work, how did you go from becoming an OBGYN, career OBGYN, to launching Brain Health Kitchen?
Well, I think my story is really typical of what happens when you just follow what you're passionate about and you don't really know where that's going to lead you. So I had been practicing OB for 20 years. The first 10 years I was solo.
Wow.
And so at some point I decided I could leave early
Yeah.
after delivering, hundreds and hundreds of babies where I live. But mostly 20 years in, I just was itching to use a different part of my brain. And so I was getting feeling a little cooped up by the schedule that I had,
Right.
which is basically being booked out in the office for, full days and months in advance. And I just wanted more time with my kids, honestly. They were both in middle school at the time, and I was missing their soccer games. And I was missing some of their ski matches. So I basically just decided to take a break and then pursue some things that I really loved, like cooking. I'd always been a cook ever since I was in high school. I have been a passionate home cook, and I always loved travel. So when my kids went to summer camp, I would go to culinary school. And I ended up piecing together a culinary education purely out of the joy of cooking over a couple summers. And then, I was still reading my medical journals, still obviously very passionate about medicine. And towards the end of my career, I had been mostly interested in menopause and the interaction of nutrition and how it helps people age better. And so I was reading through my journals, and I started to see so much data start to coalesce around in about 2015 that there is a link that was developing and getting stronger about what we eat and how it affects our brain health. And so I started teaching cooking classes in my community specific to brain health,
right,
and other types of things. And then around that same time, my own mother was diagnosed with dementia, which we had been suspecting for a few years, but we got the diagnosis. And I took a deep dive into literature to figure out, how do I help my mom?
Right.
What should she be eating? How do we slow down this process of cognitive decline? And then that same year, I founded the Brain Health Kitchen Cooking School.
Absolutely love it. And we're going to get into brain health and nutrition. I want to take us off track just a little bit because you are an OB, or you were an OB. I don't know. Is it once an OB, always an OB? Like my husband's a Marine. He's like once a Marine, always a Marine. I don't know how that works for you, but
once you're a physician, you're always a physician.
Exactly. Yeah. So we talk a lot about hormone health. And I thought that was such an interesting thing that you had made the connection between menopause and nutrition. And while most of my listeners aren't at that stage yet, you did mention, you mentioned a lot of your patients struggled with brain fog, which I know a lot of women struggle with brain fog. And I'm just curious if we could just quickly do like a quick dip into brain fog and menopause and how nutrition supports that and how it's all kind of connected.
Oh, yeah, that's such a good question. And, for the last 8 years of my practice, I saw primarily menopausal and perimenopausal women. And so I was super interested in impacting health at that age group. And, perimenopause, as doesn't start when you're like 48 years old. It starts in your 30s. It's a long transition. I'll put it that way. And also it starts when your hormones actually just start to change. So for some people, it's after they have a baby in their late 30s. For some people, it's early 40s. Everyone's a little bit different, but everyone experiences symptoms mostly related to the changes in their estrogen and progesterone levels. So these fluctuations in hormones are one of the reasons women can get brain fog. Now, brain fog is not a medical term.
Yeah.
And a lot of neurologists don't really like this term. But it's one of those terms where like we know what we're talking about when we say brain fog, right?
Yes, exactly.
You're overwhelmingly tired all of a sudden. It means that you have trouble remembering things that you're supposed to remember, like short-term things that you just learned. It means you have trouble concentrating and it's difficult to focus. I had a lot of women who were working in business, and say accountants, when they would come to see me and they would look at a spreadsheet and they would say, Annie, I just can't, these numbers don't make sense to me. I can't just, plow through this like I used to.
Right.
And that's brain fog. What we do know is that there's a real reason for that has to do with your hormones and the way they make your energy levels in the brain tank. The medical term is a bioenergetic crisis. And if you've ever had a feeling where all of a sudden you just get this overwhelming fatigue and you can't think, that's because fluctuating estrogen levels in the brain have made your glucose levels, your brain source of energy, just plummet. And for a lot of women in the perimenopause, that is one of the root causes. There's others too, of course. It might be poor nutrition, it might be dehydration, it might be lack of sleep, it might be stress, right. All of those things. Yeah. But there is a hormonal explanation as well.
Thank you for that. I thought that was so interesting when I don't know if it was in an interview I listened or an article you'd written. I was like, that's so fascinating. I just wanted to quickly, chat about that for a minute. So thank you for that.
Brain fog is temporary too. Brain fog is it's not like you start getting that when you're, in the perimenopausal ages and it never goes away.
You just like brain fog for the rest.
State, and you can work with it and get rid of it.
Oh, good. So see, we could do like a whole episode about that, I feel. But you mentioned Brain Health Kitchen, and I love what you're doing with Brain Health Kitchen. So for anyone who's not familiar, what exactly is Brain Health Kitchen?
So Brain Health Kitchen started really as a platform to raise awareness about the things that people can do to protect their brains from age-related cognitive decline. Things like Alzheimer's, of course, but other types of dementia as well. And just cognitive decline that comes with aging is not something that people should expect to happen. Right. It's not a normal part of aging. So I started really as a platform for awareness. I started out with a website that is a resource for like really delicious food that you can make from neuroprotective ingredients. It's based on a lot of the classes that I give. And Brain Health Kitchen is also, it's a cooking school. It doesn't have a brick and mortar cooking school here in Jackson. I started it in Jackson, Wyoming in my home kitchen where I would have people over and cook with them every week. And then I started taking it on the road. And now I cook with people in churches, at cooking schools, all over the country, all over the world. I'm just teaching people the techniques that are better for the brain, what ingredients to use, and most importantly, how to make it all really easy and delicious.
I love this. And I know my listeners are itching to get into like, well, what ingredients should I be using and how should I be cooking? We're going to get to that. But before we do, I do want to talk about brain health because I feel as though most of my listeners are women and we're not thinking about brain health on a regular basis. But I would just like to explore why should brain health be something we start thinking about at an earlier stage and what affects our brain health?
Well, I would love it if women especially would start thinking about brain health in their 20s and 30s, not wait until they get to the menopause and they start getting brain fog. And then they're like, oh, wow, what's wrong with my brain? It's like, yeah, it's failing me. Because, well, number one, there's a really important concept that is fairly new in the Alzheimer's world. 10 years ago, we thought that Alzheimer's was something that you just got when you got old. Like your uncle is 75 years old and he gets Alzheimer's. Like it's something he happens like a stroke. And that's not really what happens. So Alzheimer's is a process that has to do with chronic inflammation over decades in the brain. So people who are especially prone to this type of neurodegenerative disease, they start to get not signs of it, but they start to get problems from it 20 to 30 years before they have their first symptoms. Meaning they're starting to build up abnormal proteins in their brain. They're starting to have evidence of chronic inflammation on their brain scans. And so there's something happening in the brain. There's a process happening decades before you start to think it could be Alzheimer's. So the time to really pay attention to brain health is in your 20s and 30s, because that's when you build healthy habits that we know are protective of your brain. And then between the ages of 45 and 65, which is midlife, basically, we know that lifestyle habits then have a huge impact on whether or not you get dementia later.
Wow. So you mentioned lifestyle habits. What are some lifestyle habits other than nutrition, which we are going to talk about, you guys, but what are other lifestyle habits that we can focus on?
Well, exercise is huge. And it's so important that women especially get enough resistance training in addition to aerobic exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to get a ton of exercise, but you need to get enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important because number one, it builds a very strong, resilient cardiovascular system. And Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia, but the other more common type is vascular dementia. And that has to do with the health of your blood vessels to supply your brain. And there's a lot of overlap too. Half of all Alzheimer's patients have vascular dementia too. So you want to keep your blood vessels really healthy, and that will bode well for later in life when you need good, robust blood flow to the brain. So cardiovascular exercise, that would be something aerobic, like a vigorous hike or a bike ride or a walk, 150 minutes at least every week. If 75 of those are really hard, that's even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And sleep. What is the importance of sleep when it comes to brain health? I saw you mention that quite often also in your articles and posts.
Yes, sleep is such an interesting scientific thing to study. You know, again, like 10 years ago, people didn't really think much was happening when you were sleeping. But now we know it's this metabolically active state of your brain that is crucial for how your brain ages. And the reason is that there's a process going on when you sleep. If you get enough slow wave sleep, which is kind of that deep sleep you get right after you fall asleep.
Yeah.
And also enough REM sleep, which is sort of like what you get before you're waking up and you're starting to get all these crazy dreams. Those two phases of sleep are really important to trigger what's called the glymphatic system in the brain. It's like lymphatic with a G on the beginning. And what this is, it's a way for the brain to sort of sift out all these abnormal proteins and byproducts from inflammation that have built up during the day. And basically, it's a pressure gradient that builds up in your brain, and there's vacuoles, like there's fluid collections inside the brain, and it excretes it through the cerebral spinal fluid.
While you're sleeping?
While you're sleeping.
Wow.
But the thing, it doesn't work if you don't get enough sleep. And there's other lifestyle things that you can do to stimulate it, like not eating a lot before you go to bed. I say don't eat 3 hours before bed, and try not to drink any alcohol within at least 3 or 4 hours of bedtime. Because that's going to mess up those, whether or not you get those same types of slow wave and deep wave sleep.
This is all so fascinating. I'm just like amazed by this. And, you mentioned in terms of cardiovascular and brain health, and I was curious, is that one of the reasons? Because as I was preparing for this, I was researching the heart connection to Alzheimer's, like heart health and brain health are connected. Is that why? Because of the vascular Alzheimer's?
Yes, it is, because a lot of dementia is caused by little strokes that happen over time, and also low blood flow. So if you have, let's say you're developing Alzheimer's disease, which is an accumulation of abnormal proteins in your brain that cause inflammation and cause it to shut down and lack communication, basically. If you also have poor blood flow to the brain, you're going to deteriorate a lot more rapidly. But you want to keep your cardiovascular system strong throughout your life, because you're going to have better cognitive function at every stage of life, not just when you're older and you really need that extra blood flow to kick in.
So sleep, exercise, and obviously nutrition. Is there anything else that's a little bit out of like what we would consider like healthy lifestyle alternatives that could also benefit brain health?
Well, people are paying more attention to stress reduction, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're stressed out all the time, there is the hormone cortisol that remains high in your blood. There was an old study that was done on working moms where, their cortisol levels would be fairly high most of the day while they're at work. And then when they got home, they stayed high until bedtime, whereas men's cortisol levels went down after they got home. And so, the accumulation of cortisol over time, we don't know if this is one of the reasons women have more Alzheimer's than men, but it's definitely something to address in terms of global brain health. Finding something that you can do. There are studies that show that meditation reduces Alzheimer's risk. There's studies that show that even just deep breathing, maybe like 3 minutes a day, something minimal, can have an impact on bringing those cortisol levels down.
That's fascinating. So you've mentioned inflammation in terms of being a cause for Alzheimer's and some forms of dementia. But are there any other known causes for Alzheimer's?
Well, Alzheimer's is thought to be a multifactorial disease. So it's kind of like the way we think about cardiovascular disease. Like when someone gets a heart attack, say they're 65 and they get a heart attack, it's not because they had this one event at this one point in their life. It has to do with years and years and years of plaque building up in their arteries, and also like sticky things in their blood that cause blood clots, that cause it to stick to the artery and cause an event. So it's like all of these factors over time that have to do with inflammation, stress, lack of exercise, all of these things, nutrition. So in the brain, it's sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
We're starting to think of it as this process, and not just one thing, but inflammation that might come from viral infections. We used to think that the blood-brain barrier was like this tight thing, like nothing crosses the blood-brain barrier. And now we know that the blood-brain barrier is actually kind of, sifty. Things can get through it. And every time you have a viral infection like the flu, then inflammatory particles can get to your brain. There's some studies that show that the more times you've had the flu in your life, the greater your risk of Alzheimer's.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And there's studies, there's some solid data that shows that people have had multiple herpes infections in their life might have an increased risk of Alzheimer's. Not to scare anyone who's had those things, because those are obviously very, very common infections. But there's something about the blood-brain barrier, how it breaks down, what gets through, inflammatory particles. And another key piece in this multifactorial thing is insulin resistance.
Really?
So some people think of Alzheimer's as a metabolic disease, meaning it has a problem with the way that we process glucose in the things that we eat, and how much insulin is secreted by our pancreas and how our bodies respond to it. The hippocampus is the part of the brain where short-term memories are held and where they're consolidated into long-term memories. It's also the part of the brain where Alzheimer's attacks first. That's where you first see the proteins depositing and signs of inflammation, basically. Now, we know that your hippocampus can actually become insulin resistant, meaning if you have diabetes, your risk of having Alzheimer's later is 2 to 3 times more.
Oh my goodness.
If you have just a borderline abnormal blood glucose, your risk of Alzheimer's goes up. Somewhere inside that memory center of the brain, it responds very acutely to what's going on with our insulin and our glucose levels.
That's fascinating. So I know now my listeners, are like, okay, so like, what do we do? Like, because, I've had, maybe someone's had herpes or they have diabetes, or I have a girlfriend who's had really bad traumatic brain injuries, like concussions. And so I was telling her, I was talking to you, and like she says, this is one of the things that she doesn't really try to explore too much because it causes her a little bit of anxiety. But so I'd like to shift gears to talk about the nutrition, how nutrition supports brain health. So we talked about sleep and exercise, meditation, reducing stress. And now, kind of like your expertise in all of this is also nutrition. And so I want to provide some hope for everyone listening.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How does nutrition support it? And what are some of the most interesting studies you've come across as you've been diving into this field, I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such a good point. And, I'm an optimist. When I say that, Alzheimer's starts in the brain 20 to 30 years before the first symptom, I'm not saying that in a bad way.
Yeah.
I'm saying that in a good way, because we have decades to do the things that we know can slow down or stop the process. We don't really know if we can prevent Alzheimer's altogether, but we know that we can slow it down tremendously. And that's a really important point. And pretty much everyone has some risk factors.
Right.
Traumatic brain injury is a big one. I have a lot of people who've had concussions or some sort of TBI come to my school to learn how to mitigate, the effects of that. And you can do it with nutrition. It's really important. So the thing to know about nutrition is that there are things that are protective of the brain, and then there are things that are inflammatory to the brain. There are inflammatory particles in the foods that we eat. So part of it is eating a brain healthy diet, but part of it is also avoiding certain foods that we know are just not good for our brain and can accelerate decline. And do that over decades. Yeah. And chances are you are going to reduce your risk by at least 53%. That's what the Mind Diet study showed. And now we're getting all sorts of studies showing that it might be even more when combined with these other lifestyle approaches, up to 60 to 80% reduction based on lifestyle.
It's really
so it makes a lot of sense. The brain is really plastic. It's really pliable. There's a lot of things that affect it, but you can also impact it in a positive way, especially with healthy habits. So one of the best studies that came out initially that got my attention was in 2015. And this was the Mind Diet study, MIND. And it's basically a brain healthy spinoff of the Mediterranean diet studies. And if anyone's familiar with the Mediterranean diet, it's been shown with many studies over many years to be protective of heart disease, to be protective of dementia. People who follow it live longer and they have less cognitive decline as they get older. So there's always positive things about the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah.
So the researchers at Rush, who are doing the Mind Diet study, they said, well, let's take the brain healthiest parts of the Mediterranean diet and put it into its own little food pyramid and make it a brain specific Mediterranean diet. And that's what they did. And so they decided to describe food groups that are brain healthy, that you should eat a lot of, and then food groups that are brain harmful that you should avoid or limit in your diet. And so they make it really easy. It's a great way to teach at the cooking school because it's really easy for people to memorize. There's 10 brain healthy food groups and there's 5 food groups to avoid. And you want to eat more of those brain healthy food groups. For instance, berries are their own food group in the Mind Diet study. Whereas in the Mediterranean diet, if you've ever seen that pyramid, the base of the pyramid is fruits and vegetables, and there's berries in there, and there's nuts, and there's seeds, and there's all these things. So what the researchers did is they looked at all the data on berries. And there are specific ones that show that, like, if you eat a serving of berries every day, then you will do better on cognitive function as you get older. This was a study done in women around the age of 55 to 75.
Wow.
There's also studies that show that if you eat berries 2 half-cup servings a week, then you have less Alzheimer's than someone who does not.
Really?
Yes. So that's a simple thing people can do.
Right.
The minimum is 2 half-cups of berries a week. I like to say eat berries every day. If you can, just keep them in the freezer, throw them in your smoothie, just do whatever you can. Make sure you get them in the winter as well as the summer. So berries is a really easy one, right? Not many people don't like them. Yeah. I don't know anyone who's really allergic to them, except maybe strawberries sometimes. The second food group is leafy greens. And what the Mind Diet does is it pulls leafy greens out as their own food group, separate from vegetables, because leafy greens are probably the most nutrient dense of all the plant foods. And they have, we have MRI data now that looks at people's brains and compares people's dietary patterns and what their brain volume looks like over time. And we know that people that eat at least one salad a day, their brains will look 11 years younger on MRI than people that don't eat salad at all.
That's insane.
Yeah. And one salad is about 1.5 cups of raw greens in the study. So,
and they're talking like the dark leafy greens, correct? We're not talking iceberg lettuce, I imagine, right?
No. And then of course there's a hierarchy of greens. In my book, I'll have a food pyramid for all the leafy greens as well, because the dark leafy greens are much more nutrient dense, like kale and arugula, spinach, things like that. But they all have some value because they're all giving you a different array of phytonutrients. I'll go through the other food groups really quickly.
Yeah,
so we
please.
Get
Thank you.
Vegetables, nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, whole grains, fish and seafood, poultry, small amounts, and olive oil as a primary cooking oil. Now, the Mind Diet described a 10th food group, and it was red wine.
Okay.
And the Mind Diet is now an ongoing placebo-controlled trial with data expected this week or this year or early next year. But for this Mind Diet trial, they took out red wine as a brain healthy food group.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, Dr. Martha Claire Morris, the lead researcher, she basically told me it's really hard to study people and to measure their alcohol intake. So it was more of a practical thing.
Yep. Yeah.
But honestly, I personally move it to the foods to a limit or avoid category now, because there's been so much data since 2015 about, the impact of moderate, what our society likes to call moderate drinking on the brain. There's some new data that's showing that, we should just throw out the whole idea of moderate drinking. That means different things to different people.
Right.
But what we should be thinking about is limiting alcohol intake and think about light drinking. Light drinking, I would define as less than 7 drinks a week for most people. Because that's where there's a huge study that came out of the UK a couple months ago that looked at something like 26,000 people, and they followed them with brain MRI data. And they showed real problems of brain volume in people that drank more than 7 drinks a week.
It's so interesting. I think I found that was one of the questions that I had for you was alcohol, because I did a kind of a deep dive on how alcohol impacts even our hormones. And like you said, one of the findings that they're saying is people have different definitions of what is consistent of, like, one glass of wine per day for a woman is considered like a healthy, healthy dosage. And I think a lot of us, that's not what we do. And in terms of how it impacts our brain, I just think it's just, I love wine. I'm French, so I'm like, oh, good glass of wine, red wine. So I'm not completely one of those people who's like never drink again, but I'm also one of those people who's very aware of how wine impacts, because for me, I have some anxiety, and I notice the minute I drink wine, everything, like the next day, everything is just kind of like, I'm not just my best self. So between hormones and how it impacts our brain, I think it's just so interesting for people to just kind of be aware of.
It's so interesting. And, I was noticing a lot, especially during the beginning, since the beginning of the pandemic, the way alcohol is marketed to women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the marketing companies make it look like, oh, this is empowering us to get everything we want in life and to work and then come home and have a big glass of wine, go out with the girls and have wine. But the problem is that women are more sensitive to the impact of alcohol, all the detrimental effects. Women are also more likely to get Alzheimer's. 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are female compared to men. Women at menopause are more vulnerable to the effects of alcohol because it impacts the sleep so much more dramatically. And women don't really have the same enzymes to metabolize alcohol as men. So I think we should, I love red wine as well. I'm Italian, but when you go to Italy and you see how they actually drink, they're having very small amounts of wine with their meals. And red wine has been proven to be kind of like the secret sauce of the Mediterranean diet, because it may be a stress reducing drink at the end of the day, which is highly beneficial. It may have a little bit of blood thinning capabilities, which reduces cardiovascular risk, like heart attack, stroke, which leads into dementia risk. And it has flavonoids, it has phytonutrients in it, which for some reason people think that it might help absorb the nutrients from the food it goes with. So it's always been a wine with food in the presence of family as a stress reducing drink. Newer studies show that it doesn't have to be red wine. I mean, it's got flavonoids and things like that, but they're tiny amounts. You'd have to drink a whole barrel to get like a good dose. But it could be a beer, or it could be a glass of white wine, or it could be something else, or it could just be a non-alcoholic drink. But a stress reducing drink definitely has some benefit, it seems.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And it's interesting because also when I'm in France or with even my family, you have like your normal drinking cup, and then my grandfather always used to have a small wine glass. And I think the difference here in the US is, like, when we go to a restaurant, there's like a huge goblet for our glass of wine. We're like, yes, getting my money's worth. So I understand how, like, we have different perceptions of like how much is enough, and what is actually a stress reducing when I'm having my meal versus what is probably a good dose.
It's true. I buy the Sauvignon Blanc glasses. It's just like the smallest white wine glass. And that's what I use for my red wine.
Okay. So for my listeners, you're not saying no alcohol at all. Just be mindful of how much you're drinking.
Absolutely. Being mindful is the most important thing. And also, there has been benefit in terms of brain health if you're able to keep it to a really small dose. But it is a dose dependent drug, alcohol. And, what the new studies are showing is that there's a very fine line between light drinking that's beneficial for your brain and moderate to heavy drinking that could actually be brain harming.
Yeah. I want to take it back a little bit to some of the nutrition. So you mentioned berries and kale, legumes, olive oil, fish, and then what was the other one? What did I miss? Chicken. Yeah, chicken. Okay, so when it comes to these foods, is there something we should try to get them all in at the same meal? Is it okay to, disperse them throughout the week? What does it look like if you're creating a brain healthy diet using these foods?
Oh, yes. I love this question because I think one of the best ways to approach eating for brain health is not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. And the guidelines for the Mind Diet are based on that. They're saying how many servings should you have in the course of a week. So you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself to try to eat all these things in the course of a day. You're going to have good days and bad days. I had a really bad day yesterday. I looked at what I ate and I was like, oh boy, I need to eat better. I was just really busy and grabbing things. So that happens, right? So like for leafy greens, you want to eat those every day. For berries, you want to try to eat them every day. For vegetables, you want to have a couple servings every single day. For nuts, you want to have about a quarter cup about 4 times a week at least. I probably get a lot more nuts in my diet because they're really filling. They're a good source of protein for me. And I don't drink much dairy milk. I prefer plant-based milk. For whole grains, the recommendations are 3 half-cup servings a day, which is kind of a lot. But it's really just a small serving of oatmeal, maybe some brown rice in the evening, and maybe one other thing, like some quinoa. Fish is really important. And I know a lot of people are plant-based to some degree, and some people are fully plant-based. So if you are 100% plant-based, I actually recommend that you try to supplement the omega-3 fatty acid that we get from fish that is particularly brain healthy, and that's DHA and EPA. But if you eat high quality fish and seafood, you should be able to get enough of these omega-3s if you have about 1 or 2 servings a week of fish. And I still take DHA anyways, because it's probably the most crucial brain nutrient that you can get. And, it's true in pregnant women, it's true in young people, it's true in older people, it's true in everyone. People that are deficient in DHA have a 70% greater chance of getting Alzheimer's later.
How would you know if... Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You cover your bases. Okay. Yeah.
I cover my bases with DHA, but that's really important if you don't eat any fish or seafood at all as well.
Okay. So I'm sorry for interrupting. How do you know if you're low in DHA or some of these nutrients? How would you know that?
It's really hard to tell. There is a blood test you can do, but it's not a typical test that's available. They use it for when they do studies on this and populations. So I think you get a good quality product and you take it, regularly. Or you seek out high quality fish. For example, wild caught salmon has more DHA than farmed salmon. And it costs a little bit more, but you don't need to eat this every day or every other day. 1 or 2 servings of really good quality fish or seafood a week is plenty. So I think you just go with good quality food and knowing that it's going to be a good source for it.
Wonderful. It sounds like, I have sometimes one of my really good friends, she's like, it just seems like common sense, Maddie. Like all this thing about nutrition, it sounds like just eating healthy is kind of at the root of all of this. Is that accurate description? And like kind of avoiding, like your pizzas and burgers and all of that. How, if someone were to argue, my girlfriend always argues with me. She's like, it's just about common sense. Like all you got to do is eat healthy. Is that the case here?
That is the case here. And it's really tricky for some people. It's trickier for some people than others, I would say. But the way I would approach a brain healthy diet is try not to be perfect. Don't stress about the food that you're eating. And, take a look at the Mind Diet guidelines and say, well, I probably do that about half the time. So maybe you're 50% in, 50% out. Maybe you're really eating more from the brain harmful food groups, which are full of saturated fats, like ultra processed foods, lots of butter, lots of cheese, lots of pastries and sweets, lots of fast food, lots of fried food. Maybe you're choosing from those too much. So everyone has ways that they can improve, and everyone starts at a different point. So when I was a medical resident, for example, I was probably like 50-50. I was probably eating good when I had time to cook for myself, but most of the time I was just in the hospital eating out of vending machines, like literally.
Wow. And
so, over time, I've developed just sort of a way to approach it. And now I would say I eat brain healthy 95% of the time. And that gives me 5% of the time. It gives me the choice. If I'm at someone's house for dinner and they're serving something I don't think is like the best food, I can eat a little bit of it. Or if I'm on vacation, I want to have gelato every single day for a week. Then I have gelato every single day for a week. I don't eat much ice cream in my normal life. I think what's important is what you do most of the time. If you're putting a really nasty, high in saturated fat, lots of sugar creamer in your coffee every single day, and maybe you have 1 or 2 of those, that's going to have an impact on your brain health long term.
Right.
If you have like a frou-frou latte with bad stuff in it, maybe once a month, whatever. It's a treat.
Yeah.
It's not something that's part of your daily life. So I try to weed out the brain unhealthy foods, especially the ultra processed foods, which what we're calling, the fast foods and the packaged foods. try to get rid of most of the refined carbohydrates in your diet. That's white bread and sadly white rice. I mean, if you eat white rice, just make sure you eat it with lots of vegetables, but it doesn't really have any fiber or nutrients in it. And these foods can basically hit your blood sugar like sugar, or your bloodstream like sugar, and it elicit an insulin response. And that gets back to that insulin resistance that develops over time. Getting rid of sugary drinks is huge in the brain healthy diet. There was a study that came out a couple of years ago out of the Boston University that showed that people who drink sugary or artificially sweetened drinks have an increased risk of not just dementia, but stroke. And they were able to measure this based on the number of drinks per day. So if you went from like 1 sugary drink to 2, your risk went up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so think about all the sugar, you could consume in, coffee drinks or anything you buy that's like an energy drink, or maybe the sugar you put in your coffee or your tea at home. So I would wean off of that stuff, and then you're going to be really far ahead of the game.
Yeah, that's so interesting you're mentioning that. I was talking to Bettina Siegel, who wrote Kid Food, feeding kids in a processed world, and how much added sugar there is even to our young generation. And that was, you don't even notice how much sugar you're probably adding. But even if like kombucha, really great for, probiotics, I always mention to people, like, make sure you're looking to see like how much, even something healthy like that, I could have 36 grams of added sugar. So one of those.
Yeah. I'm always shocked when I look at the label. So, when you go to the grocery store, you have to be you just have to be smarter than these marketing companies. It doesn't take that much, but you have to really avoid anything that says it's healthy on the label, because it's marketed to be healthy. It's probably not. You just turn that food product over and you look at the nutrition box, you look at the ingredients, and now there's a line for added sugar. It's being grandfathered in, so not everything has it yet, but within probably the end of the year, there will be added sugar, and you will be shocked at how much sugar is in your kombucha and your yogurt, and things that just seem really healthy. Right. And those are things that your body does not need, and they are detrimental over time to the brain. Absolutely.
So a lot of my listeners are parents, busy parents. Is there any research on feeding children for brain health? You said starting in your 20s and 30s, but can you start, when they're really little, and is there anything they should include other than what we've already discussed?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually good studies on berries in children and how it helps them mentally focus and concentrate better. So that's one food where they've got some decent data showing that berries are the perfect breakfast for kids where they go off to school, before they do their homework or whatever. So that's good. I think that, most parents now are more attentive to the amount of sugar in their kids' food. I think that's such an important thing. Another thing is, if you can develop a kid who has a taste for plant diversity, that is going to be amazing, because, we're learning so much about how the gut microbiome affects the brain, and you can't really have robust brain health without a healthy gut microbiome and a diverse amount and colonies of microbiota in the gut. And the way you do that is you have diversity in your plant foods starting early in life. And that works for older adults as well. It doesn't matter what age you are. If you start eating 30 different types of plants in the course of a week, and then start going up from there, if you eat a pretty good diet, I would say that you're getting 10 to 20 different plants a week, but we tend to reach for the same things. Yeah. Like, I like broccoli. I always get broccoli. Yeah. I like carrots. I always get the carrots. People tend to have these food, habits that they have. So diversity is the king. And if you can develop diverse habits in your children, I think that would be amazing. Without the added sugar, without, problems with, ultra processed foods that will make them insulin resistant. I think that's a great way for them to start thinking about brain health early.
Absolutely. And for all my parents who have picky eaters at home, I am bringing on a child nutritionist to explore some of these things, because I think it is important to start, opening up their palates, diverse foods. But obviously the struggle with parenting, and you're a parent. Your children are much older now, but there's that.
Oh, they were the pickiest.
Yeah. So exactly, like, I'm not a mom yet. I'm growing my human, but it's one of those things I'm trying to like get ahead of the curve here. So yeah, that's great. That's so interesting. I think it's so important because from my perspective, all the research I've been doing and bringing guests such as yourself on, it's like I hear all these things, and then on the flip side, I have my friends who are like, "Well, my kid is only going to eat like chicken nuggets, and there's no way I'm going to get him or her to eat like broccoli and kale and et cetera, et cetera." So,
Yeah. But
um,
as you know from going to France and you see how children eat in Europe, if they don't know what a chicken nugget is, they're not going to ask for it.
yeah.
So one of the best things I did when I started to learn more about brain health nutrition, my kids were still in middle school, is I completely changed the snack cupboard. Okay.
Mm,
There weren't any, I got rid of the chips, I got rid of the pretzels, got rid of the things that were kind of treats, but also things that I thought might be healthy snacks, like the popcorn and the crackers and things like that. Got rid of all of that. And I just replaced it with, nuts and seeds. And, there are some power bars that are good. There's some that are really junky, but there's some that are good. You can read the label, you can make your own really easily. I started making energy balls, out of dates and peanut butter and things like that. There's a million recipes for that all over the place. Things like that. I found out that they really like hummus.
mm,
So I always had hummus available. Sometimes I made it from scratch. Sometimes I just got some from the grocery store. And that was what was available. And it completely changed the way my family snacks.
right.
And you have to be hyper vigilant too, especially when you're the mom or the dad with children in the house. You don't want that stuff to come into your house. And it finds its way in. No matter how vigilant you are at the grocery store, it just finds its way in. So you have to just continually be cleaning out the fridge and the freezer and the cupboards, like who bought the Nutella? I mean, occasional treat.
Yeah,
Okay?
that's like
But not slathered on your toast every day.
that's the one thing I don't buy, but whenever I do get crepes or something, like I'll have that with Nutella, because that's just like my little weakness for sure. And I think like taking the pressure off. So for the busy parent, you mentioned like creating things, and that's something I love cooking as well, and I love making things. But I think of the average crazy individual, they're coming home from work, they've got to get this kids, to soccer practice, they have to, finish, a work call late at night. When it comes to that kind of a busy life that most of my listeners have, what tips do you have in terms of including healthy brain food, healthy diet into their diet?
Boy, it's a tough one. I
Mm.
went through that for years with my kids.
Yeah.
I was a busy OB running to the hospital. The best thing I did for myself and my kids was I would prep breakfast before I went to bed, because otherwise there was always an emergency and I'd be rushing out of the house. And I wanted to make sure, I wanted to be able to see that they were having a healthy breakfast to start the day. So whatever it was, whether it was like scrambled eggs with broccoli or something in a tortilla, or whether it was the fixings for a smoothie, or peanut butter on whole grain toast with sliced apples, or some oats that were going to be microwaved. Whatever it was, I would try to do it ahead of time. And that really helped. And then also, you can teach your kids to do that as well. Once it's semi-prepped, starting at young ages, they can start getting in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Also a really good thing. I just doing that ahead of time would be the most important thing I could do.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And I think that even for me, with the pregnancy, sometimes there are days where I'm like extremely tired. But if I've done some of the meal prepping on a day that I had more energy, for instance, and it's like I can easily put something together. And I think meal prep is something that's like wonderful and so helpful. So I think that's a great tip. You mentioned cooking techniques. I know we're getting close to your hour here, so I just want to be mindful of that. But you did mention cooking techniques, and one of the things that I had heard you talk about was grilling and AGEs. Are there other, in terms of how to reduce AGEs, and you can explain what that is? Are there other cooking techniques? Like for instance, is kale better wilted or raw? Does it matter? Or berries, in a crumble or, in a smoothie? Does it matter how we cook these ingredients?
It does matter quite a bit. And it's one of the most important things that I can share with people when they come to the cooking school for hands-on cooking classes. But it's really easy when you think about it. So AGEs that means advanced glycation end products. These are what makes junk foods harmful. These are the inflammatory things in foods that make them bad for us. They basically tear through our blood vessels and cause inflammation. They cross the blood-brain barrier. They get coalesced inside brain cells. it's like this garbage, this pile of debris inside your neuron when
Hmm.
you look at it under a microscope. And no one used to know what it was before, but now we know this is just, inflammatory particles from the
Wow.
foods that we eat. Our body creates AGEs as we get older, but we get most of it from our diet. So a lot of the brain harmful foods like fried food, fast food, things that are processed, whatever a food is processed, let's say a cracker at the factory, they're applying really high heat to that, and also processed oils, which have their own inherent amount of omega-6 fatty acids, which are more inflammatory. So it's like piling on foods with heat is what makes AGEs rack up. And you do that in your cooking too. If you say you're taking a steak, so meat, for example, is already really high in AGEs, and then you sear it on a grill and get those nice grill marks on it at high heat, that also creates AGEs, along with some other things that are a little bit carcinogenic.
Yeah, yeah.
Mentioned, but it's the way you're cooking it that can really make a food that's already a bit high in AGEs worse. So all you have to do is just think about low, slow, gentle cooking.
Okay.
If you want to have a steak, that's great, but use indirect grilling. Okay. Meaning you have a hot zone in your grill and you have a not hot zone, and you want to cook it in the medium or cooler part so that it doesn't have direct heat applied to it, especially flames. If you're searing something like a piece of fish in a pan, use low heat. Searing probably shouldn't really happen that much. I'd really rather have you warm up some olive oil over medium heat and then slide the fish in, and then maybe some braising liquid, which might be a little bit of white wine or maybe some broth, even just some water, some aromatics like garlic or some other vegetables. Cook it that way
Huh.
instead of searing it. Whenever you get that brown crust that especially Americans,
Yeah.
sort of, like, and it's like the mouth-watering part of our food, then you're really racking up AGEs. It's very true for chicken. So when you cook chicken, it's better to braise it. It's better to cook it in a stew.
Oh.
For vegetables, you can stir fry vegetables if you want. They're so low in AGEs. You can roast them at a high heat in the oven. You can stir fry them, and they're still going to be incredibly good for you. Just don't burn them. Like,
Yeah.
the burnt Brussels sprouts has become
Yes.
kind of a popular thing.
Yeah.
And they are delicious, but like not so much of the burnt Brussels sprouts, more stir fries and things like that. But the best way to keep the nutrients inside your vegetables is with steaming, braising, roasting in the oven, sort of lower heat methods for sure.
That's so interesting. So how about like white fish? When white fish, so I sear my white fish. I'll put it in olive oil, but then I'll get it to that like crusty like outside. Is that what you're? Does that apply to that as well? So what you
Yeah.
recommend?
So, well, what I would prefer, if you like that style of fish, and I love that as well, and I want to eat really good fish, and I want it to be tasty. But if you put something on the fish as a coating that will
Hmm.
protect it from the direct heat, that helps. So it could be whole grain breadcrumbs. It could
Yeah.
be almond flour. It could be something like that. It could be pumpkin seeds. It could be ground up hemp seeds that you coat the fish with. It could be flax seeds, and then you can put it in the olive oil and get a nice brown crust on it if you like. When you apply the fish directly to the heat, what you're doing is you're damaging those delicate omega-3 fatty acids that your brain needs and your body needs, the DHA and the EPA. And you're also, the vitamin D also seeps out.
Oh my
And
goodness.
fish is a really good source of vitamin D. So I do fish on the grill. Sometimes I do it at a very low heat. I have one of those grills that you can cold smoke. You just turn on the smoke without the
Mm.
heat. And I love doing fish that way as well. That's a brain healthy cooking technique, even though the smoke sounds like it wouldn't be. Cold smoking is, but smoke plus high heat, not so much.
Yeah, yeah. This is
Um,
fascinating. You've kind of just blown my mind a little bit because my way of cooking is always like, and I consider myself, I'm not saying that I'm not a healthy cook but I'm like, whoa, this is like, I'm learning so much.
Good,
Yeah,
good.
that's
Yeah, and it's all
fascinating.
easy stuff too. And like it might be counterintuitive that an instant pot or a pressure cooker would be a healthy cooking method, but it is. It
Yeah.
is high heat, but also, the steam is self-contained, and so that the nutrients stay mostly intact. So I use my instant pot a lot,
Okay.
slow cooker a lot. Um, yeah, make
That,
make life easy for you.
yeah, no kidding. And that I'm working on a membership to help busy parents really like cook healthy foods, and like slow cooker is something people keep bringing up. Like, we want slow cooker recipes. Well, this is amazing because now it's like not only does it save you time, just put it on before you head out, but then you're getting more nutrients out of this in terms of brain health.
Absolutely. And liquid is a great cooking medium. If you have liquid in there, like a braise or a stew or a soup or something like that, or even like a little bit of liquid when you cook your eggs. Like, let's say you're frying an egg.
Yeah.
Now, eggs we haven't talked about because it's not part of the mind diet, but eggs are a brain healthy food group unless you have very high cholesterol and you're watching that and you want to get your saturated fat down, et cetera, et cetera. Most people can eat eggs, and eggs are good for you, and I consider them a brain healthy food. But if you take your egg and you fry it over high heat and then you flip it over and the yolk touches the pan where it's hot, what you're doing is you're damaging, the lutein, the choline, and some of those delicate fatty acids that make it brain healthy. So a better way to fry eggs would be to fry it on one side, sunny side up, and then add a little bit of fluid to the pan. It could be a broth. It could be liquid I do this with beans a lot. I do a can of beans. I use the bean liquid, and then cook it, kind of like braise it. And that's a much healthier way to cook your eggs. You can also scramble them, but scramble them over very, very, very low heat. Like you want the creamy scrambled eggs, not the dry, hard ones.
That you just blew my mind, because the only way I eat eggs is just how I like flip them over and I make sure all the yolk gets out and I fry that yolk. And I'm like, oh no, I have to try something else because I'm trying.
No, you're good. When I was pregnant, I couldn't eat eggs at all. They just really didn't agree with me. Poached eggs are also good. If you poach an egg, it's a very brain healthy way to cook. Just about anything is poaching because it's in liquid and it equalizes sort of the heat. But you want that yolk to be jammy. Like, you don't want it to be runny, obviously.
Yeah.
Most people don't because of the risk of salmonella. You can have it slightly runny if you're not pregnant. That's up to you. But the best way is really like that jammy yolk.
Yep.
Where it's still really soft, but it's not going to collapse when you cut into it.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay. And for kale, and I swear, I have one more question after this. I'm going to let you go. I'm just now I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. Kale, should it be cooked, wilted? Does it matter if it's raw? I always wonder, like, is spinach better cooked or is it better raw? Do you get more ingredients one way or another? I mean, more nutrients.
I don't know if I have the exact answer for this because there's not a ton of data on this, but I would say that a variety is best. So I think that sometimes when you cook things like kale and spinach, they do release some of the nutrients and they become more bioavailable to your body. That certainly happens with things like tomatoes. When you cook tomatoes, more of the lycopene gets released into the structure that turns into the sauce. So like cooked tomatoes are actually more nutrient dense for you than raw ones. But eat them both ways because, throw raw greens into a smoothie, but also eat them cooked.
Got it. Annie, this has been, I feel like I need to bring you on to do a cooking show for all of my people because this is awesome. I absolutely love it. Yeah, it would be so wonderful. I'm like listening and I'm like, oh, no wonder my last question for you is your cookbook. Because I'm like, I cannot wait to get your cookbook because already here you've shared like just little things that I do. I consider myself a pretty healthy cook. And then I'm learning like, oh, maybe I'm not getting all the nutrients. So I really appreciate all your insight. Let's talk about your cookbook really quickly. When can we get our hands on it and what inspired you to launch it?
Well, honestly, I've been staying busy teaching these classes for a couple years, and every single class I would teach, people would say, "Okay, well, where's your book?"
Yeah,
I haven't really had time to do that, and so I found the time to do it. I have an amazing publisher at Artisan Publishing, and I just handed it in. So there's going to be a little bit of a wait. We have to make the book. I've finished writing it. We did the photo shoot this summer. And now there's some production that needs to happen. So you can look for the book, which will be some variation on the title of the Brain Health Kitchen Cookbook. We're not really sure what that is yet, in fall of 2022. And until then, I continue to post recipes on my website, Brain Health Kitchen, and I give cooking classes all over the place. And I do a lot of Zoom classes. I would love to come back and do maybe healthy snacks for you and your audience.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Towards kids and busy moms. That's definitely, I have a lot of tricks up my sleeve for healthy snacking. So that would be really fun.
That would be so fun. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I so appreciate this. I absolutely will have you on to do that. Launching a membership course in a few weeks. I'm working with the nutritionist on this. I haven't really announced it yet to everyone. So if you're listening to this, hopefully I've already announced it. But that would be amazing. One of the things I'd love to bring on guests such as yourself for anyone who signs up to the membership. So that would be great. Yes. So where can we find you for anyone who's interested now to get more information? Where can we connect with you? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Well, it's pretty easy. You can go to brainhealthkitchen.com, and that's where you can see articles about brain health, about what to eat, about what not to eat, and also a bunch of my original recipes. And if you go through the recipes, you'll see brain healthy cooking techniques. Like when I make my muffins, you'll see I use olive oil. I use a certain kind of sugar. I'm using a lot of high fiber ingredients to offset the sugar, things like that. I'm on Instagram at Brain Health Kitchen. I have a free newsletter that you can subscribe when you go to either my Instagram bio or my website. And about once a month, I'll send out a letter that has what's new in brain health news, a couple new recipes, and basically where I'm going to be teaching in the next month or so.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on your cookbook. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you for all the work you're doing. It's really, it's so helpful. It's fascinating. Thank you for your time today and for all the research you're sharing. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It really is a pleasure to share that with you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Annie. Have a wonderful rest of your day. All right, friend, that about wraps it up, but this convo does not have to end here. I would love to hear from you, so please send your questions and comments my way. And if there's a topic you want to hear more about, send me a DM on Instagram at TheWiseConsumer or email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com and let's chat. In the meantime, could I ask you to do me a huge favor, please? I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes out of your day to subscribe to my show and leave me a review if you haven't already. You can do so in the iTunes app. It's that purple icon that comes preloaded on most smartphones, but I've also linked it up in the show notes if you're not sure how to access it. Anyway, that wraps it up for today. So until next time, friend, be safe, stay healthy, and take care. Hi, friends. As always, just ending this episode with my obligatory disclaimer. Please remember, The Wise Consumer is intended for educational purposes only. The content being shared here should not be used as a substitute for professional care by your healthcare provider. I am not a qualified medical expert, nor do I pretend to be, so please note that the content and research I share and explore on this podcast is not intended to treat or diagnose you. If you have any medical questions, concerns, or wish to make changes to your diet, please speak to your physician or any qualified healthcare professional for that matter. The Wise Consumer may not be held responsible for your health, dietary, or lifestyle decisions. I am simply here to encourage you to seek healthier, more eco-friendly, and conscious alternatives. While the Wise Consumer podcast offers information from many sources, the opinions expressed are solely those of the Wise Consumer and not those of any affiliate or other entity. Additionally, while I always do my best to source and research the most up-to-date and accurate information, I realize science is continually evolving. If you come across any scientific information that is blatantly incorrect, please kindly email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com. And finally, this podcast and any other offerings of The Wise Consumer may contain copyrighted material, the use of which has not always been specifically authorized by the copyright owner because it is being used for educational purposes. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this podcast or any other offerings of The Wise Consumer for purposes of your own that go beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner.